Now recently I sat down with a client and he looked exhausted. He looked tired and he looked burnt out. And he just said to me, look Ben, I don't hate my job. If I could give up tomorrow, I would love to do it. But the problem is, I just don't think I can do it. Now, this individual is 65 years old and he's got about £100,000 in his pension. Now, he'd read so many things online that said you need £500,000 in your pension in order to retire. So his question to me was, can I do this with £100,000 in my pension? So what I said to him was, look, there are so many things you can read online which quite frankly take no account for your personal situation. So what I would suggest we do is sit down and actually crunch the numbers based on historical market data to just give you an idea of how much you could actually afford to spend in retirement. So today I'm going to show you exactly how much you can spend if you've got £100,000 in your pension at age 65. This is going to be based on historical market data to actually give you some exact numbers and actual real life data rather than rules of thumb. But if you're new here, my name's Ben, I'm a financial planner, and my aim is to help as many people as possible gain more clarity and confidence around their finances. Okay, so let's set the scene here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this for an individual first, and then once I've done that, I'm going to go on to a couple. Just so depending on your situation, you can see if this is possible for you. So in this example, we've got an individual who's age 65, and as I said, he's got £100,000 within his pension. We've also assumed he's got a full state pension entitlement, which as we stand today is about £12,500 a year. And we've assumed his pension is invested in a balanced portfolio, so about 50% equity and 50% bonds. And we've assumed that he's going to draw down from his pension as and when he needs it, rather than buying an annuity. So that money is going to stay invested for the majority of his retirement. We've also assumed a 25-year retirement, so that's based on him retiring age 65 and that money needing to last him until age 90. And it's important to mention at this point that all of these figures are adjusted for inflation and a net of tax. So the figures you see are the actual spend amounts rather than the amounts you actually need to take out of your pension. And as I said, this is all based on historical market data. So effectively what we've done is we've taken the last 100 years of market data and looked at every 25-year period during that 100 years to actually work out what the most you could spend is, what the least you could spend is, and what the average you could spend is. So at this point you might be thinking, okay, well, if I've got £100,000 in my pension and I retire at age 65, how can there be a range of potential spending? Now, this graph here illustrates that exactly. So you can see here that this charts out the last 100 years of market data, and as I say, takes every 25-year period during that 100 years. So this is called sequencing risk. And what this shows here is that depending on when you retired over the last 100 years, can have a massive impact on the amount you could actually spend during retirement. And the reason for this is because if you had retired, let's say, just before the 2008-2009 financial crisis, you would have started taking money out of your pension whilst that value is going down. This means that over the course of that 25 years, you could take out a lot less from your pension than, say, someone that retired maybe in the 1990s, just as markets were going up. So this shows that depending on when you retire can have a huge impact on how much you can spend during retirement. So that's why it's very difficult to just say, you've got X £100,000 in your pension, you'll be fine or you won't be fine. Okay, so let's get into the numbers. So you can see on screen here that the best case scenario for this individual would be spending £1,700 a month. So this would have been if they're retired at the most optimal time over the last 100 years. Now on the flip side of that, if they're retired at the worst possible point, so back to my previous example, if they're retired just before the 2008-2009 financial crisis, they would have only been able to spend £1,200 a month. The key figure really to look at here is the average, because this is typically what the average person would have been able to do over the last 100 years. And this is a spending per month of £1,400. And I think at this point it's important to mention that this includes your state pension income. So on screen now you can see how that individual's income or expenses would have been funded over those 25 years. So you can see that in the first 2 years of retirement from age 65 to 67, all of their income would have been from their pension. But you can see as the state pension comes into payment, they are a lot less reliant on their personal pension. So at this point, you've got about £1,000 a month from the state pension and about £400 a month from their personal pension. Now, before we get into the figures for a couple, if you are enjoying this video, please do consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like this in the future, because it really would mean a lot to me. Okay, so moving on to the figures for a couple. Now, in this scenario, I've assumed the exact same set of assumptions, apart from I've assumed you've each got a pension of £100,000 and you've each got the full state pension entitlement. So you can see on screen now that in the best case scenario for a couple, you would have had to spend £3,300 a month. And in the worst case scenario, you would have spent about £2,400 a month. But again, looking at the average here, that's the really important thing to do. And that is £2,700 a month. And again, just to show you how this would be broken down. So again, for the first 2 years of retirement, we've got you each drawing about £1,350 from your pensions. And then as your state pensions come in, that's £1,000 each. So you've got £1,000 from one state pension, £1,000 from another state pension, and the remaining £700 is through a combination of both of your personal pensions. Okay, so you might be looking at those figures and thinking, is this enough? Because to be quite honest with you, it's very difficult to actually work out how much you need when it comes to retirement. One of the biggest reasons for that is because most people, once they come to retirement, have paid off their mortgage, which for a lot of people is their biggest expense. So actually trying to work out how much you need to be spending in retirement can be very difficult to do. So the data I've got on screen now is taken from the Retirement Living Standards. And this is based on their definition of a minimum level of retirement and a moderate level of retirement. So you can see that for an individual, they're saying the minimum level of income or expense you need to be able to retire is £1,100 a month. And for a moderate level of retirement, you need about £2,600 a month. You can see that based on the historical market data we took and the average expense that you could incur of £1,400 a month, that's just above the minimum and a fair way off the moderate. But to be completely honest with you, I think this £2,600 a month is way too high. Because as I say, for most people, when they come to retire, they probably would have paid off their mortgage. Now, clearly this is a big assumption to make, but if that is the case, you probably don't need that £2,600 a month on average. And the reason for this is because if you are earning the current average income in the UK, your net income each month is probably going to be less than £2,600. So why all of a sudden would you need the exact same amount or more when it comes to retirement? So it would be interesting to know from you, do you think this £2,600 a month figure is too high for individuals? Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Okay, so moving on to a couple, you can see that for them, the minimum level of income you need for retirement is £1,800. And for a moderate level of retirement, your income needs to be £3,600 a month. And you can see that based on historical market data, the average expense of £2,700 a month is smack bang between the minimum and the moderate. Okay, so what does all of this mean? The first thing I would say is that £100,000 is a supplement and not your entire pension. Because you can see that from those examples, if you are retiring at 65 with £100,000, you are heavily reliant on your state pension to do a lot of the heavy lifting and provide you with that income. You can also see that when you retire can have a massive difference on how much you can actually spend during retirement. So that's why it's really important to actually stress test what your situation is, because if you do retire at the worst possible point, it's really important that you understand the implications of that and the knock-on effect it can have on how much you can spend during your retirement. Now, as I say, it'll be interesting to know your thoughts on, do you think these figures are too high or too low? Because everyone's going to have their own opinion. But as I say, when I look at those figures, particularly for individuals, that seems far too high to me. So leave me a comment below and we can have a discussion about it. But anyway, hope you've enjoyed the video. Hope you got some value from it. If you did, please do consider subscribing to the channel because I will be posting a lot more videos like this in the future, particularly about retirement planning and tax planning. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video.